The last thing I remember before she found me was the sound of the colony alarm, 3 long pulses, then silence. The kind of silence that means the person who was supposed to sound the fourth pulse is no longer able to. My name is Jake Mercer. I'm a structural engineer, which means I spend my days making sure that the fragile pressurized shells humans have bolted to the surface of Mars don't collapse and kill everyone inside them. It's unglamorous work. It's also, I've always believed, the most important work on the planet. You can have all the scientists and commanders and diplomats you want. If the walls fail, none of it matters. I'd been on Mars for 14 months when the walls failed. Ares was humanity's largest Martian settlement, 7 interconnected habitat domes, a population of 412, greenhouses, a medical bay, 2 research labs, and 1 truly terrible cafeteria that somehow made reconstituted soy taste worse than the original. We'd built it over 3 years, piece by piece, bolt by bolt. I knew every structural joint in every dome personally. I'd argued about half of them with the construction teams. I'd lost sleep over the Eastern Corridor pressure seals for 6 consecutive weeks in year 2. I loved that place the way you love something you've built with your hands, not romantically, practically. The way a craftsman loves a thing that works. The walls had failed, not because of my work, because something had hit Ares 1 from the outside, something precise, surgical, and devastating. 3 of our 7 habitat domes were breached in under 4 minutes. I'd been in the maintenance tunnels when it happened, running a routine pressure check on the Eastern Corridor. The same corridor I'd worried about for 6 weeks, the one that had never given me a single problem. The explosion threw me 30 meters through a service shaft and deposited me, broken and bleeding, on the Martian surface. No suit, half a helmet. The temperature was -60. I had, by my best estimation, about 8 minutes. I want to be honest about those 8 minutes, because I think people imagine that facing death produces clarity. It does not, in my experience. What it produces is a very strange mixture of mundane thoughts and animal panic. I thought about the pressure seal report I hadn't finished. I thought about my sister back in Auckland, who I'd promised to call 3 weeks ago and hadn't. I thought about whether the colony's evacuation protocols were good enough. I'd reviewed them twice and flagged 2 weaknesses in my last report, and now I would never know if anyone had fixed them. I spent the first 2 minutes trying to crawl back toward the airlock. The airlock was gone, not damaged, gone, cleanly removed as if it had never existed. I spent the next 2 trying to find any emergency shelter beacon. There were none within range. I spent a minute just breathing, telling myself to think, to be useful, to find a solution the way I always found solutions. No solution presented itself. I spent my last minutes lying on my back on the red dust of Mars, looking up at a sky the color of a dying ember. It was, I remember thinking, nothing like the photographs. Every image of Mars I'd ever seen had flattened it somehow, made it look like a film set. The real sky, the actual sky above me as I lay dying, was stranger and deeper, and more beautiful than anything a camera had ever captured. Bands of dusty rose and amber and a peculiar bruised violet near the horizon. The sun, small and pale and ancient. I was trying to memorize it. That's what I was doing. Not accepting death, not at peace, just trying to hold onto the specific quality of that light, because it seemed important that someone remember it correctly, and I was the only one there. Then a shadow fell across me. She was tall, nearly 2 meters, and backlit by the pale Martian sun, so that for a moment she looked like something carved from light and copper. She wore armor unlike anything in any human military database. Organic-looking, curved, the deep amber gold of autumn leaves, fitted to a form that was unmistakably, disarmingly human in its proportions. Her face, when she knelt beside me, was extraordinary, skin the warm color of burnished copper, sharp, elegant features, and eyes the color of amber caught in firelight, currently regarding me with an expression I couldn't read. Her black hair was pulled back in complex warrior's braids, a single strand loose across her cheek. She said something in a language I'd never heard. Musical, precise, each syllable deliberate. I started, and then coughed blood onto my visor, which felt like a fairly conclusive argument against continuing the sentence. She looked at the blood, then at me. Then, with the air of someone making a decision they know they'll regret, she reached into a compartment on her armor and produced something that looked like a silver disc. She pressed it against my broken helmet with one hand and did something to her own armor with the other. The disc sealed the crack. Warm air flooded in. She looked at me with those amber eyes waiting, I realized, to see if I would live. I breathed. Once. Twice. She said something else, shorter. I would later learn it translated approximately to inconvenient. Thank you, I managed. She studied my face for a long moment. Then she picked me up effortlessly, one arm under my shoulders, one under my knees like I weighed nothing, and carried me across the Martian surface toward a ridge I'd never noticed before. Because I would discover it wasn't a natural ridge. It was a door. I woke up in a room that smelled like minerals and something faintly sweet, lying on a surface that was too perfectly comfortable to be any human technology I knew. The ceiling above me was carved stone, or what looked like stone lit by strips of amber light that pulsed softly, like breathing. She was sitting across the room, watching me. Up close, without the emergency of dying to distract me, she was even more striking. The copper skin, the amber eyes, the architectural perfection of her face, and underneath all of it, something that read unmistakably as authority. This was not a soldier. This was a commander. There was a second figure in the room, younger, also copper-skinned, standing near the door with the rigid posture of a guard who has been told to stay still and is finding it difficult. He was staring at me with open, barely concealed fascination. When he caught me looking back, he straightened even further and fixed his gaze on the wall. The commander said something sharp in her language. He nodded and left. "Apologies," she said, and I startled. The word was accented but clear, no translation device. Soldiers are curious about novelties. Is that what I am? Currently. She stood and crossed to a shelf carved into the stone wall, returning with a cup of something warm. She set it on the surface beside me without offering it, just placed it within reach, as if the decision of whether to trust her enough to drink it was mine to make. I noticed that it seemed deliberate. "You sealed my helmet," I said. "I observed this as a fact, yes." "Why?" She was quiet for a moment. "That is the correct question. Do you have an answer?" "Several. None of them are strategically sound." She stood, she moved with the economy of motion of someone who has spent a lifetime in armor, and crossed to stand over me, studying me the way I imagined she studied maps. "You are from the settlement." "Ares 1, yes." "We destroyed it." The words landed like the explosion that had thrown me across the tunnel. I stared at her. She met my gaze without flinching, without apology, but also, I noticed, without satisfaction. "How many survived?" I asked. "Unknown, some. Your people have good evacuation protocols." A pause. "Better than we anticipated." "You sound almost disappointed that you didn't kill us all." "I sound," she said precisely, "like a commander reporting an incomplete operation." She looked at me. "I am Kael Sorra, garrison commander, Dhari 5th Territorial Force. Mars, what your people call Mars, is Dharival. Sacred ground. The third world of our origin system. Your settlement was an act of desecration. We didn't know you existed." "That," she said, "is the argument your people always make." I looked at her, she looked back at me. Outside, somewhere beyond the carved stone walls, Mars continued its slow, indifferent rotation, red and cold and ancient. I picked up the cup, drank. It tasted like hot minerals and something faintly herbal, strange but not unpleasant. She watched me drink with that same studying expression, and I had the sense that passing the test of drinking what she'd left me had told her something she wanted to know. "Why am I alive?" I asked again. Kael Sorra looked at me for a long, unreadable moment. "Because," she said finally. You were the only one who looked up at the sky instead of trying to run. I hadn't expected that answer. What does that mean? It means you were either very brave or very stupid. In my experience, the difference is rarely clear until later. She turned away. Rest. You have injuries that require time. Then we will determine what to do with you. And if I don't like what you determine. She paused at the doorway, looked back at me over her copper shoulder with those amber eyes. Then you are welcome to walk back to your settlement, she said. It is approximately 40 kilometers northeast. The temperature tonight will be -83. She left, I stayed. I finished the cup, set it down carefully on the carved stone surface. Looked up at the amber-lit ceiling of a civilization I hadn't known existed 12 hours ago, inside a planet I'd thought I was beginning to understand. Somewhere above me, through 40 meters of ancient Martian rock, the sky I'd been memorizing was still there. Strange and deep and nothing like the photographs. I thought, at least someone else had been looking at it correctly all along. I was there for 6 days before she told me about the orders. In that time, I learned several things. The Dhari were not invaders, or at least, they didn't see themselves that way. They had been on Mars, Dharival, for 3,000 years, in deep underground installations that our surveys had entirely missed because we hadn't been looking for something that's sophisticated. They didn't live on the surface. They lived in it, a civilization carved into the planet's interior, vast and ancient and invisible to every probe and satellite humanity had ever pointed at the red planet. We'd colonized their sacred world without knowing it existed. I also learned that Kael Sorra was not supposed to have saved me. I learned this because on the 4th day, a younger Dhari soldier, copper-skinned like Kael but with green eyes, nervous energy barely contained, came to bring me food and stayed 3 minutes too long, watching me with open curiosity. The commander doesn't usually do that, he said, in halting English pulled through the translation device. Save people. Save enemies. He seemed to realize he'd said too much and left quickly. That evening, Kael came herself. She brought 2 cups of something hot that smelled like spiced stone, Dhari tea. I'd learned, and sat across from me with the deliberate posture of someone who has decided to say something difficult. You've been speaking to my soldiers, she said. They've been speaking to me, mostly out of curiosity. I paused. You're the only one who doesn't seem curious about me. I'm extremely curious about you, she said. I have simply learned to be less obvious about it. Something about the directness of it surprised a laugh out of me. She watched the laugh with that studying expression she always had, like she was cataloging it. The orders, I said. What are they? She was quiet for a long moment. The Dhari High Command has authorized the complete removal of human presence from Dharival, all settlements, all personnel. She looked at me steadily. The word we use translates to removal. The method is at garrison commander's discretion. The tea was suddenly very hot in my hands. How many settlements are there? 7. Ares 1 was the largest. The others are smaller research stations, mining outposts. She paused. Approximately 2,300 humans total. And you have orders to remove them, yes. But you haven't. She looked at me, no. Why? The silence stretched long enough that I thought she wouldn't answer. Then she set down her cup with the careful precision she brought to everything and said, because I came to the surface to assess the damage at Ares 1 myself. I wanted to see what we had destroyed, and I found you. And you looked up at the sky. She shook her head slightly, a gesture I'd noticed she made when she was frustrated with herself. I have destroyed settlements before. Other worlds, other conflicts, they all run, they all fight or hide or call for help. No one has ever, she stopped. Accepted it, I said quietly. Looked, she said, like you were trying to memorize it. The sky. Even while you were dying. She met my eyes. It made you seem, another pause, real, in a way that made the order harder to execute. I thought about that moment. I hadn't been accepting anything. I'd been thinking about how the Martian sky looked nothing like the photos, how it was stranger and more beautiful than anything a camera had ever captured, and how it seemed wrong that the last thing I'd see would be something so extraordinary, and I'd never be able to tell anyone. I told her that. She listened with complete attention. She always listened that way, like every word was data she intended to use. In Dhari tradition, she said slowly, we say that Dharaval chose us, that the planet called our ancestors here, across the void, because we were the ones who would see it correctly. She looked at me. You were seeing it correctly. I was dying. Yes, and still you looked. A long pause. It is a Dhari thing to do. On the sixth day, the High Command sent a verification request. Status of remaining human settlements. Expected timeline for removal. Kael told me this at dawn when the amber lights in the stone corridors shifted to a warmer tone that the Dhari used to mark morning. She looked like she hadn't slept. What are you going to tell them? I asked. I don't know yet. Kael? It was the first time I'd used her name without the title. She noticed, those amber eyes sharpened slightly. 2,300 people, families, children, people who came here because they believed in something. They came here because they didn't know we existed, she said. That changes nothing about what this ground means to us. No, I agreed. It doesn't, but it changes what the right response is. I looked at her, you know that. You've known it since you sealed my helmet. She was quiet for a long time. Outside in the corridor, I could hear the distant sounds of the garrison, soldiers moving, equipment humming, the deep mechanical heartbeat of a civilization that had lived inside a planet for 3,000 years. If I don't execute the order, she said finally, I will be relieved of command, possibly charged. I know. If I do execute it. I know that too. She looked at me with those amber eyes. You are asking me to risk everything for people I don't know. I'm asking you to do what you already decided to do when you picked me up off the surface, I said. You just haven't admitted it to yourself yet. Something shifted in her face. Not softness, Kael Sorra didn't do softness exactly, but something underneath the command, underneath the armor, that was very human in the way that mattered. The part of a person that knows the right thing before the mind has finished arguing about it. She stood, straightened, became the commander again. I'm going to send a response to High Command, she said. I'm going to tell them that the situation is more complex than anticipated. That I have intelligence suggesting the human settlements may be leveraged for diplomatic purposes rather than removed. Is that true? It will be, she said. If you can get a message to whoever is in charge of your people's diplomatic corps in the next 4 hours. I stared at her. You're giving me communications access. I'm giving you 4 hours and a translation device. She moved to the door, stopped, looked back at me over her copper shoulder one more time. Jake. It was the first time she'd used my name. When this is over, she said, one way or another I want you to show me what the sky looks like from the surface. During a storm. I have read the atmospheric data, but I have never, she paused. I have never looked. My chest did something complicated. I'll show you, I said. She nodded once, left. The next 72 hours were the longest of my life. The diplomatic contact worked barely. The UN Emergency Space Commission had been in crisis mode since the attack on Ares 1. And getting them to take seriously the message that their structural engineer was negotiating from inside an alien garrison required 3 hours of verification protocols and one very skeptical admiral. But they listened, and when I told them what was at stake, not just Ares 1, not just Mars, but first contact with a civilization that had been our neighbor for 3,000 years without us knowing, they sent their best. Kael held her command. The High Command accepted her framing, reluctantly, conditionally, with 3 oversight officers sent to monitor the situation. She accepted the oversight without complaint and managed them with the same efficient authority she brought to everything. The first formal talks between humanity and the Dhari began in a carved stone room 40 meters below the surface of Mars. with a structural engineer as the only human who'd met a Dhari before, and a garrison commander who had technically been ordered to remove all of us still running the room. It was not smooth, nothing real ever is, but it held. 3 weeks after she'd carried me across the Martian surface, Kael found me on the ridge above the garrison entrance at what the Dhari called third morning, an hour before the human dawn. A storm was coming in from the north. The sky was doing something extraordinary. Layered bands of rust and amber and deep rose, the dust catching the approaching light and scattering it into colors that don't exist anywhere else in the solar system. Below us, the first cautious humans from the surviving settlements were making their way to the garrison entrance for the day's talks, their suits bright against the red ground. She stood beside me and looked up. I watched her face while she watched the sky. The storm rolled in slowly, massive, ancient, utterly indifferent to the small, impossible things happening beneath it. The light changed by the second. The amber in her eyes caught it and held it, and I thought, not for the first time, that whatever came next, the negotiations, the politics, the long, complicated process of two civilizations learning to exist in the same sacred space, none of it would have happened if she hadn't looked at a dying man on a red plain and made a decision that wasn't strategic. Well, I said. She was quiet for a long moment. The data, she said finally, does not capture it. No, I agreed, it never does. She turned to look at me. The storm was close now, the wind picking up, her braids moving across her copper face. Those amber eyes, steady and unguarded in a way I'd learned she reserved for very few moments. Jake. Kael. I had orders, she said. I know. I want you to understand it was not sentiment. It was not weakness. I looked at you, and I made a calculated assessment that the order was wrong. I know, I said again. And then, because we'd gotten past the point of pretending, I also know that calculated assessment is what you tell yourself when the truth is harder to say out loud. The storm hit then, a wall of red dust and pressure that would have been terrifying without suits, was magnificent with them. She didn't move. I didn't move. We stood on the ridge of a planet that had belonged to her people for 3,000 years and was now, carefully, becoming something else, something neither of us had a word for yet. She reached out, took my gloved hand in her gloved hand, a small gesture, barely visible against the dust and the scale of the storm, something that would have looked like nothing to anyone watching. It was not nothing. Show me the night sky too, she said. When this is over. She reached out, took my gloved hand in her gloved hand, a small gesture, barely visible against the dust and the scale of the storm, something that would have looked like nothing to anyone watching. It was not nothing. Show me the night sky too, she said. When this is over, when there is time. Every night, I said, if you want. She looked at me. The storm roared around us. Mars turned beneath our feet, ancient and red and full of things we were only beginning to understand. Yes, said Kael Sorra, garrison commander of the Dhari 5th Territorial Force, in a voice that was not a commander's voice at all. Yes, I think I do.